Welcome to TMI, a podcast by Henry Ford Allegiance Health. Well, hey, Andrew.
Hey, Dave.
It's another podcast.
I know, and I'm pretty excited about this one.
This is a good one.
Mm-hmm.
It's fancy.
Mm-hmm.
Getting fancy around here.
Yep, we pulled a pretty good guest.
It is a great guest.
Yeah.
We both here work at Allegiance Health, Henry Ford Allegiance Health, and we have for a little while. And it's a great organization to be at.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of cool things going on. Such a great culture. And a big reason that, a big reason I worked here is because the leadership has kind of brought this community together to become more healthy. And one of the main people behind a lot of these initiatives and guiding our community is with us today in the studio. Georgia Fojtasek, thank you for joining us today.
I'm very glad to be here, Dave and Andrew.
Yes.
So Georgia is the president and CEO of Henry Ford Allegiance Health. You've been here for 30 years.
Right.
And been doing a lot of things, mostly in leadership, and your position changed. You became CEO and brought a lot of change to our community and navigated us through a lot of different things. So we just wanted to bring you on and let you know we're extremely grateful for what you've done for us, and more importantly, what you've done for the community, and just kind of turn things around for us, it seems like.
Yeah.
It's been, this whole time of reflection through retirement has been terrific for me, and traveling to our various campuses to visit with our staff, to be able to get a view in a very short period of time of everything we've built has been very, very rewarding, because so much has happened. I became CEO 25 years ago, and we were a community hospital. And, as we initially, after I became CEO, is when there was a lot of mergers and acquisitions happening, and I think the concerns of the board were, could we be sustainable, because we were really primary care and some secondary care, but much of the specialty care was transferred outside the community. So the initial time was spent actually going and talking to strategic partners. We went and talked to everybody. And the decision of the board then was, and working with our consultants from KPMG, was, do you want to create a system that is sustainable for the long term, or do you want to become part of another system? And the driving force got to be the community. And I don't think we understood it at the time the way we understand it today, but somewhere it was that ability to drive it ourselves.
Yeah. And that's one thing that's really impressed me about even the decisions that our board takes and just the direction of our organization, is all of those decisions are made for the community. Like, what is the best situation that we can put our community in? And even when we have big opportunities to join with other organizations, it's just all about, is it right for us? It seems good on paper, but what is it going to do to our people? And I think
it is. And, I think if nonprofits are hard to understand in terms of their structure, because in the corporate world, people are accustomed to for-profit. There's stockholders and there's a board, et cetera. But it's easy for that to be translated to, that's the way a nonprofit works. And for nonprofits, it's a public charity. Any 501c3 is a public charity. So your accountability is to your community. And then you get to, so then whose governance? When these 501c3s are started, you have to name a governing board, which would be your startup board. And for us, it was the transition from the city hospital to a private 501c3. But those community members are volunteers, non-paid volunteers, and we've affectionately called them the owner's rep. And who's the owner? The community.
Right.
And the community, even now as part of Henry Ford Health System, remains our community. We have a parent and we had a change of control, so there's certain controls vested in Henry Ford Health System, but we retained our local board.
Yeah.
And for me personally, to be part of that for 25 years and seeing the difference that community-minded people, true community-minded people, have the mindset in terms of making decisions has been such a gift.
Mm-hmm.
And as I've said these last in a few places, that not to ever feel that we were that I was other than partners with them. So that, I mean, we've taken some pretty difficult reports to the board, but not to be fearful, concerned.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But not fearful that, I could share the most difficult information knowing that we would figure it out together.
That's huge.
Yeah, and I think the board does such a good job about thinking not only of themselves, but thinking bigger than themselves for the community. And even in some of the little decisions, I mean, not little, but throughout history, the decisions that have been made, like the building we're in right now, that's a great example of the board trusting that we can use things in our community that are still there and not let them just fall apart and really just make it something special, find use in what's around, and just really do something cool and save a portion of what Jackson is and make it better.
It is, Dave. And, there are multiples of those decisions that you and I have talked about someday, being able to, I don't know, do we fill in the blanks of the centennial, but for this building, Jackson Square in particular, what seemed to be such an audacious idea for what we were in 1996, and thinking that we needed some office space, to saying we were going to buy One Jackson Square, and that somehow we would figure out the hotel. That was
Right.
one of the big concerns, is then are we buying the hotel, because everybody believed that it needed to go away, but who was going to make it go away? And to know, I mean, the original plan was that we would rent 50% of it and we would occupy 50% of it, which is what happened. And then to bring Hendrick Shore here to, help us with such a behemoth operation, and Hendrick's role in economic development in the community. But it truly was a thinking through that at that time, a huge vacant property would potentially risk the landscape of the community at a time when the community was not doing well anyway.
Right.
Yeah. And those decisions are not easy ones. There's been a lot of difficult decisions that
Very difficult.
have to be made. And that really speaks to, I think, the need and our responsibility to be like transparent and authentic for when things don't go right or when things happen. I think that's one of the big things that we see. Our staff are proud of us, proud of the leadership, to be able to tell it how it is, like tell the truth and not sugarcoat things, but just really, be truthful.
That's so accurate, Dave. And during that time of the Jackson Square acquisition, part of what was also happening is the local EMS, the private emergency medical services, wanted to sell, and we had figured out pretty quickly, as a result of some contacts we had, that Huron Valley Ambulance in Ann Arbor would be a great partner. And so that was in the works. And then I believe it was hospice and home care and the speech and hearing clinic. So here you are in the mid-'90s with fragile, small nonprofits that really needed an anchor. And we were the obvious anchor. For the speech and hearing clinic, that was the only place that children on Medicaid can get hearing aids, and children who cannot hear cannot learn. So we brought them in. And, the community was very, very concerned about that acquisitiveness. And when I look back on that, I think on one level we really did tell our story. If I think back now to today, and maybe some of this is just how communications are communications have definitely evolved. I mean, that was largely playing to a daily newspaper.
Right.
That was the fabric that we needed to think about. It was hard to have a conversation like this that someone would pick up on social media. And so I think we would even be more deliberate. I tried to make sure we weren't doing corporate spin. But when you're sending press releases and those types of things and your only vehicle is the printed word, it's different than being able to have this kind of communication.
Yeah.
And that in itself is something for us to think about as it relates to transparency, authenticity, and how you can share information that's very meaningful in a different way that lets people translate for themselves.
Yeah. And at those times when in our health system, historically, we haven't always been the best, but we've always strived to become better.
Yes.
And even political leaders have kind of kept us on task for that. And our reaction, I think, is telling of who we are, where we say, yes, we need to be better, and maybe some of those procedures and things need to change. And it really shows that we're authentic. So
It's our healthcare and our health is deeply personal, and in many of those experiences, hopefully we're all getting our primary care, where it's routine, you hope.
Yeah.
When patients are in the hospital, there's high vulnerability because often it means something is wrong. And to be able to have people have a sense of comfort is really critical in an era where AARP magazine and others routinely run articles, parade, on how to keep your hospital from harming you. And I look at those and think, I mean, it's not exactly how you want your industry. It's sort of like, how would you feel if it was about your automobile? And, how to keep GM from messing up your car.
Right.
To think about past history. But that is our industry, and we are human beings taking care of human beings as much as we try to put fail-safes in. And I think healthcare has come a distance. We have more of a distance to go in high reliability. And I believe we need to have the conversation around what are the things we do. And it really is necessary for people to advocate for themselves, to ask questions, to insist. We want people doing that and pushing us. And people need and benefit from advocates as well, especially in a complex environment like hospital care.
Yeah. That's great. And when those opportunities happen, I mean, it kind of shows our resilience of how we bounce back from those situations. What's been your experience with kind of becoming resilient? Have you had to bounce back from anything, or? It's a silly question.
When you're building like we built, not every decision turned out exactly as we anticipated, but we had a very, I think, good vision for clinical redesign that was more personalized care around the patient. With Vision 2000, as some may remember. And, it was so much change in an environment where I don't think organizationally we were ready. And so it did not go well. And our staff protested, and we didn't really have the culture of being able to talk to one another, so we got in the media. And, those were very difficult times. There are some pretty amazing stories around that some of them brutal lessons learned, and some of them inspiring lessons of people whose lives you touched and didn't know, who came to our aid and defense by translating. And so to be able to have gone through that time and to understand what it took to regain trust inside the organization first and then outside the organization was probably one of the biggest lessons I've ever had, that we really needed to engage our team in a different way and start talking about why we would make such significant changes in the way we provided care. And, it wasn't long after that where we had the 700 patients where we were cleaning our endoscopes, and there was a process step that was skipped. What we heard from the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta and the State Health Department in Lansing was 99.9% chance nothing happened. But through our value of integrity, our board decided we would inform those 700 patients, and as a result, because of 700 people and a small community, we should be proactive in going to the media. And those were the right things to do. And it was a challenging time, but we actually brought the media in to see how we clean our scopes. We talked a lot about colonoscopies, because the last thing we wanted is for people to say, I'm never going to have a colonoscopy. And so we talked about cancer and everything that really created concern on our part about this situation. And I think it was a real turning point. So it's how do you take something that's very difficult and make it positive? And I'll tell you, the platform for that was the Tylenol incident, where when we were researching crisis management, Tylenol, when they found cyanide in the Tylenol capsules in the 90s, was Tylenol took every product off the shelves regardless, not just their capsules. And they didn't return them until they had developed bottles that it would be evident if somebody had been in the bottle.
Right.
And that was quite an experience for us, but there were lessons from another industry where people did the right thing.
That's great.
Yeah. Transparency and accountability. I mean, those things are... They're the right thing to do, and they're not always the easiest thing to do, but it's crazy the type of almost respect and reaction you get from the people that you're being transparent to almost instantly.
Yeah.
It's sort of being in marketing, we have this great opportunity now with social media to be very open with everything that we do, and I think you gain that trust at an accelerated rate when you're transparent and open with the people. So that's
great.
That's huge.
Yeah, and I think the people doing the transparency, it's also a key thing to work with, because they are a key to our success, like the people in our organization. And I don't know if we've always had that, where people take responsibility, the leadership takes responsibility, we create leaders, we build leaders. I think this morning you mentioned level 5 leadership.
Yes.
And that's like such an interesting concept to me, and like it just shows like we value our people, and we value them enough to say, we think you can be better, and we think as a organization we can all raise up to become better and follow strong leadership and things like that. So you've been quite a strong leader yourself. How did you kind of work with the rest of the board and everyone in the hospital and the organization to kind of find that was an important thing to foster in our group?
I think some of it became a little bit instinctual at some point, Dave. And that's an excellent question that you ask. We knew that the more you do the right thing in hard situations, and we have many hard situations, and we have many opportunities to improve, the more transparency it becomes easier, even when it's hard information, because it takes a lot of energy to do spin.
Yeah.
A lot of energy. And I had, at one point during the Vision 2000 situation, the board was concerned, and so we brought in an agency. And that rapidly proved itself to be not the right thing to do, because the view of the agency really was, how are we going to present this in the best light? And I think the real question was, how do we get honest with something about a decision made in your local health system that was not the right direction, and therefore these are the consequences, and what are we going to do about it? And then to be able to have that story inside the organization, have people believe it. Mm-hmm. So the more, and I did a lot of reading, Dave, on leadership, because there are very excellent thought leaders out there. And one of my most favorite is Jim Collins, the author of Good to Great. His initial research was built to last. Corporations built to last. But in his Good to Great, he developed also a Good to Great for the social sectors, saying that the flywheel, the things that drive the nonprofits are a little bit different principles, but that's where the level 5 leadership and engaging people at all levels of the organization really started manifesting themselves for me. And I was privileged at one point in the late 90s to see Jim Collins in the American Hospital Association meeting. And it was so compelling to me, because his research was, he wanted his team to look at how these corporations go from merely good, average, mediocre, to great. And he said to them, do not come back and tell me it's the leadership and the CEO. And they kept coming back and saying, it's the leadership and the CEO, and this is what we're seeing. And he speaks himself to being resistant to that concept until his team, worked it out with him. And that's where his research started, is that it's about leadership. I think then when, as we go to now Stanley McChrystal's Team of Teams and how he fought in Afghanistan in a way that was failure, and then what he had to learn about a team of teams, bringing together the CIA, the Army Delta Forces, and the Navy SEALs to be able to fight Al-Qaeda, which, with all the brilliance of those three divisions of our government, we were failing, and this ragtag team of fighters and Al-Qaeda were winning because they didn't follow the rules. They didn't follow Army chain of command. And so he had to come up with something different. So it's sort of a long-winded way, is I think we now can build level 5 teams by bringing groups of people together who are humble, because any idea can be a good idea, and who are absolutely willing to persevere against all odds, which is what level 5 leadership is, to take organizations to places where they otherwise wouldn't go, or communities. Or communities.
And I think it's great that you've been so purposeful about putting people in their strengths, like having them build upon their strength and creating teams that have strong leaders, but also a variety of people with different strengths. I think our marketing department is a great example of that. We have so many different people here. I mean, Andrew and I look kind of the same, but we've got Pete and we've got Adam and we've got...
We're morphing into the same person the
slowly.
More we work together.
It's a little strange. But there's so many different people in all of our different parts of our organization, and just building on what their strengths are, I think, is so important. And I almost think you might have a sports reference for this one.
Well, there probably is a sports reference. While I'm talking, I'll try to think real fast, since I'm Who knows? I may become an ESPN analyst. My fame in sports analysis.
Well, you can always come in here and do a sports podcast with us.
Right. Absolutely.
Oh, we're going to do a sports podcast.
Oh, we could.
Yeah, okay. All right. I'm going to think about that after my predictions today about sport earlier today. So this team thing is, to me, is where the future is. So that is a little part of y'all's generation, for example, because of the social and the connection. And it was obviously different when I was growing up, and some of those, I think, facilitators weren't there. But this whole idea that if I can build to my strengths rather than trying to make myself whole in myself, which isn't going to work, but I can bring someone in to fill in my blind spots, then you become very strong. So the sports analogy would be the players who have certain abilities to do certain things, whether it's football, basketball, etc. And if you have that, rather than ones that are, give me the ball, coach, give me the ball, coach, and the ones that want to score the most points, I've often said, as I study teams, is that wins games, it doesn't win championships. And where do you want to be?
Yep, championship.
Most of us want to be part of a championship team, and most of us in healthcare want to be known as being one of the most excellent, greatest experience, and be able to run our business well. And to do that, you can often do one piece of that. I can spend a lot of, some people think I have to spend a lot of money on quality, and then, my financials suffer now, and in most industries we're learning quality pays, and so you're actually more cost effective. But people want to be part of a winning team. And that's what we did here, Dave, is show people that we could win.
Right. Yeah. Definitely turned the community around and have a good scorecard now, and definitely some good quality stuff coming out of here.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is just seeing the possibilities that are there. Just understanding what can happen and living life in a way where you're just building upon that, where things are continually moving. And I believe you talked this morning about someone who had a quote about living that way. Ben Zander, yeah.
Yeah.
What was that quote about?
Well, Ben Zander his wife actually had the quote that possibility is only one sentence away.
Oh, okay.
And Ben wrote the book, The Art of Possibility, with his wife. He is the conductor of the Philadelphia Philharmonic. And he was here in Jackson after several of us had seen him at the Michigan Hospital Association talk about music, conducting music in an orchestra as a metaphor for leadership. And so we wanted our community to hear him and his message of possibility. But what he talked about was things like the conductor is the only one in the orchestra that never makes a sound. And that for him, a player can lead from any chair. So what he would do at the end of rehearsals is leave sheets of paper for his players to be able to suggest to him how certain parts of a piece would be played. And one infamous one of his players came up and said, "You played my crescendo."
Wow.
So that person becomes, more engaged. And then, for the possibility for us, and I think what that time and having Ben Zander here spurned, Dave, is for perhaps at least enough in our community to see potential, because it started a dialogue that we could be different and that Jackson had potential. And it took a lot of, I think, a variety of things coming together over time, because this was not a community when Travis and I arrived here in '89 that believed in itself at all. Housing was very inexpensive, which was obviously a blessing for us at that time, because people were leaving more than they were coming. But so many people asked us, why in the world would you live here and why would you come to Foot? And then the next step was, be sure you buy a house with a lot of built-ins that you could flip fast. And I mean, that was sort of the mindset, and which I found interesting.
Yeah.
But I think of the resilience through the recession in this community. To have bounced back. I mean, the old Jackson, I think unemployment could have easily been stagnated for a very long time. But we, with a few, it took a while to get the motor running, but we have moved in a different direction. And I think for a lot of our manufacturers who were so hard hit, but other businesses, because there's, you sneeze and the rest of the community catches a cold when you're a manufacturing business, that people found a way back. And it's almost like, well, if I can go through that
right,
and come back, I can go through a lot.
Well, and I know part of our organization, that's kind of, our organization's done a good job at that. But I want to also say that you've done a pretty good job at that too, because I remember when I was first getting started, we had this little young professional group in Jackson, and you actually spoke there. You took time to come to that group and really just showed us what a good leader is. And there were a lot of people who are now in larger positions around town, just young professionals really in leadership positions that got a lot from that just evening over a Jackson coffee. So that was a really great night. And we wanted to thank you for that.
One of the things that was very easy to recognize, Dave, is that keeping young people here was critical. And so that was a pretty small group at that time in the Jackson Coffee, as I recall, is that if a small group of you were thinking about, hey, we want to talk about what's good in Jackson and how to stay here, that's what communities have to have. And now when I do new staff orientation and people tell me they're coming home after having gone away and that they now want to come back, or even better, I finished college and I wanted to come back here, is a real testimony that people want to be part of building something.
Yeah. And I'm part of that group that has left and come back. I after high school was gone for 10 years, and my family was here, and I would come back maybe twice a year, and somewhere around, I want to say 2012, 13, 14, there was visible differences in the city and in Jackson that were just when you live here, you don't see it, but when you come back twice a year, it stands out, and just activity downtown and events that are going on. And it really does, in my opinion, a big part of it come from younger people that are now finding themselves in, leadership positions or business owners. They're having that opportunity to activate that creative part of them that's always been there. They just weren't in a position to, make something happen. So that's a big reason I came back. I also wanted to start a family and, start a business idea that I had to add to what's going on in Jackson. So it's interesting to hear that story that you shared in the coffee company, to know that, some of those people that were there for that are now, doing things and making a difference in Jackson.
Yep, they're at Consumers, they're doing Bright Walls, they're part of the Anchor Initiative, they're really helping change the face of downtown and the community in general. So it was great. And I think some of the reason maybe why you spoke to such a small group was that you were so committed to your values. That's something that you talked about this morning. Is just one of the hardest things is to keep the values at the center of who you are when you face changes or you faced hardship throughout your 30 years here. So how did you manage to keep what you hold dear through all of this?
It took a lot of intentionality, and the best advice, I think, just within probably hours of being named CEO, the recruiter, who was one of the principals of the search firm, was Kiefer Ford. This was Dan Ford. He said he knew the challenges here, and he said, your values are evident, and that is among the reasons that you were selected as CEO. And he said they're going to be challenged at many turns. And if you stick to your values, it will ultimately pay off in ways that you don't understand. And that was very compelling to me, and I don't think I fully appreciated what he meant, how it could be easy to compromise. I certainly do in looking back. But it was constant, saying what are the values that need to drive this, and truly sticking through that in difficult situations. Like, do we disclose to patients? Isn't our value integrity? Of course we will. And making the right choices and not necessarily the easy choices. Easy roads are easy in the beginning, but not, toward the end. And then when you do that, just like Tylenol, I'm sure there were other options that they had, but that defined that company. Mm-hmm. And it becomes the way that, you are. And so it is probably one of the biggest pieces of advice I would have for anyone is know what your values are and live them consistently, because that leads to an authenticity. And we don't all share the same values, nor do we have to, but we can then find places where our values fit, and it's it's comfortable to work there because you're not having to twist yourself to compromise to something that isn't who you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Any other questions, Andrew?
Not really. I just wanted to say, working in marketing, we help with the staff forums that you do, and I've been helping with them now for 3 years. And going into this series, I was just curious to see how you would approach it. Being your final round, and you approached it as if it was your third round, your 10th round. There was really no lack of focus or passion and empathy to us, the workers. And I hope that you noticed or recognized just people's gratitude for that. Like, I would sit and clean up afterwards and pack up our equipment, and there would just be a line of people wanting to give you a hug and just thank you. So I hope that you recognize that all the time, and the empathetic view you have, and toward the greater community has been appreciated. Just wanted to thank you for that, and just being a really easily approachable leader, and one that is doesn't hide behind boards or send out just letters. You face the people, and I think people respect that. So
it's these last rounds of forums, and I truly appreciate the support I've gotten from all of you all in the marketing department, Andrew and Dave, because I know it's a lot of work, but it creates, if you think about Charles' roles and my role, it's the vehicle for the culture continuity. And so it really was about telling people who we are, and setting the stage for Paula's leadership, because that continuity is absolutely critical. So that is, when people ask me about my legacy, it's what continues after me. Because what has happened before me, I mean, obviously it's here, and there's a dynamic with what's been created. But what perpetuates it and draws value from it is what happens going forward. And that's got to be fueled by the culture, because healthcare is going to change, leaders are going to change, people are going to change. And so what's the stable core is what we are. And I wanted to have the opportunity to talk to our team about what we are and how we got to where we are, because many have been a part of this long journey. And there is nothing, it is such an honor to lead and a privilege to lead. The title, Chief Executive Officer, sounds like a great title. And yet, the work has such significant responsibilities for so many people, responsibility directly for people, but also because of our onus of leadership, the impact on the organization. To me, to be able to have served as Foot and Allegiance, and now Henry Ford Allegiance Health's Chief Executive Officer, especially for 25 years, which is rare, and to have been able to now have an organization, I think, with a culture that will enable so much forward momentum. It's just the privilege of being with our staff and our team during these times of these last forums is so energizing for me, and my heart is so filled with gratitude.
Well, you've given us a lot of yourself over those 30 years, 25 especially, and you'd mentioned that you're excited to get to know yourself, which, I think that made me, when you said that, just really happy for you. That's where your mind's at, and and that's the direction you're going after this. It's awesome. Yeah.
You guys have both been so value added during this time. You understand what we're trying to do, and this isn't the typical farewell tour. I didn't want that, and how you've facilitated this so that it could be genuine and genuinely me has meant a lot.
Well, we do appreciate you very much, and it's been wonderful to see your growth through these 25 years as being CEO, and the time you've been here, your growth and how you've just learned from all the difficulty you've established, and you've been a strong leader and a good example for how to live and be a strong leader, and to believe in something greater than yourself. So with your example, it's an example for all of us here to really just strive to do our best and take every day one day at a time, and just understand we're working for something good. So thank you.
Thank you both.